Story 1. A few years ago, I had one of those nights that completely rewired my view of reality. I was working as a security guard at the time, and getting called to deal with fire alarms was pretty routine. They'd go off all the time for no good reason. Faulty systems, someone burning toast, things like that. Nothing dramatic. That night, the call came in just past midnight. A block of flats in the city center, the kind of place with a history. It wasn't exactly a luxury complex, more like something patched together over time. Turns out it used to be a poorhouse back in the 1800s, which gave it an eerie edge even before I stepped inside. The residents were already outside by the time I arrived, huddled in little groups. You could tell something was off, not just the usual annoyance over being dragged out of their homes at that hour, but actual fear. A woman approached me, her face pale and serious. "We heard crying," she said, "upstairs on the stairwell. No one wanted to go near it." I raised an eyebrow. "Crying?" She nodded, clutching her jacket tightly. "It's loud, like someone's upset. But there's something weird about it." I glanced at the building. It looked quiet, but I'd done this job long enough to know that appearances didn't mean much. Still, crying wasn't a reason to ignore a fire alarm, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed in. Another guard, Steve, came with me. He was good at keeping his cool in tense situations, which was more comforting than I'd admit at the time. The stairwell was narrow and dimly lit, the kind of space that swallowed sound. Sure enough, as soon as we stepped inside, we heard it. Soft at first, just faint crying echoing up the stairwell. It was unmistakably a woman, the kind of sobbing that cut straight through you, full of emotion and desperation. I paused, exchanging a glance with Steve. "Could be a resident," he whispered, but he didn't sound convinced. The flats were already supposed to be evacuated. We started climbing, the crying growing louder with every step. My heart was pounding, though I tried to focus on the job, checking each landing, shining the flashlight into corners, looking for the source of the sound. Every time we thought we were getting closer, it moved. By the time we reached the third floor, it sounded like it was coming from the landing below us. Steve frowned, his hand gripping the banister tightly. "It's moving?" he muttered, and I nodded, my throat dry. We turned back, heading down one flight of stairs. The sound was loud now, so clear it felt like the person was right in front of us. But when we reached the landing, there was nothing, no one. Just the top step leading down to the next level. The crying seemed to be coming from there now, like it was following us, or leading us. My stomach tightened. I pointed my flashlight down the next flight, illuminating the steps one by one. Nothing moved. Steve shifted uneasily beside me. "You sure you want to keep going?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew what the job required, so we descended slowly, cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The crying grew louder, sharper, cutting through the silence like a blade. And then, as we reached the next landing, it stopped. Just like that. Gone. Steve and I froze, staring at the empty space in front of us. My flashlight cast long shadows on the walls, flickering slightly with the movement of my hands. The silence felt heavier than the sound had been, pressing down on us like a weight. "There's no one here," Steve finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. We checked the fire alarm system, inspected every floor, even knocked on a few doors to make sure the residents were accounted for. Nothing explained the crying, or the alarms for that matter. Everything was in working order. Everything was normal. By the time we stepped outside, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for hours. The residents were still gathered in clusters, their eyes searching our faces for answers. I couldn't give them any. "False alarm," Steve said, though it sounded like he didn't believe his own words. "Here's the kicker. I just bought a flat on the ground floor of that building and was scheduled to move in the following week. Not the best timing, right?" After that night, every time I walked through those front doors, I avoided looking at the staircase. I'd rush past it, keys in hand, pretending I didn't hear things I wasn't supposed to. Story 2. Working the graveyard shift at a hotel casino is usually pretty uneventful. Most nights it's just walking the floors, responding to the occasional drunk causing a scene, or tracking down where some strange noise is coming from. Nothing you can't handle. But one night, when I was still the new guy on the team, I ran into something I still can't explain. and I honestly don't think I want to. It started with a call to the top floor of the hotel. Guests from the floor below had been phoning in noise complaints, saying they couldn't sleep because of loud banging sounds coming from above them. Dispatch let us know, and since I was new, I had my trainer, Carl, with me. I figured it'd be routine. A couple of people messing around, maybe kids sneaking into rooms they weren't supposed to be in. The usual stuff. But then dispatch came back with some extra info. "There's nobody registered on the top floor tonight," the voice crackled over the radio. I frowned. "No one? Like, no guests?" "Nothing. It's empty." Carl shrugged. "Probably just some idiots who wandered up there," he said. "Maybe someone left a stairwell unlocked." That sounded plausible enough, so we headed for the elevator, half joking about what we'd find. Carl liked to make fun of me for being the new guy, saying he'd let me handle the creeps if there were any, but I could tell even he wasn't fully relaxed. The top floor of the hotel wasn't just any floor. It was known for being strange. Rumors floated around about weird things happening up there. I didn't buy into any of it, but still, walking into that elevator with him, I felt a little uneasy. When we stepped off on the top floor, the first thing we noticed was the silence. No banging, no loud noises, nothing. Just the hum of the elevator behind us as the doors closed. Carl clicked on his flashlight and motioned for me to follow him down the hallway. The second thing we noticed? Every single door was wide open. I stopped mid-step, staring down the length of the hall. There had to be at least 20 rooms on that floor, maybe more, and every one of them was open. Not just cracked, not propped open, but wide open like someone had deliberately swung them all out. Anyone who's been to these kinds of hotels knows that's impossible. The doors are heavy, built to close automatically, and unless someone actively wedges them open, they slam shut within seconds. But these weren't wedged. They weren't propped. They were just open. Carl stared for a moment, then muttered, "What the hell?" under his breath. We walked forward cautiously, shining our flashlights into the rooms as we passed. Each one was the same, completely empty, pristine, untouched. No signs anyone had been inside. No luggage, no leftover food. Just empty beds and clean floors. The air was cold and I couldn't help but notice the way our footsteps echoed, too loud for a carpeted hallway. Carl reached for his radio. "Dispatch, is engineering doing anything up here tonight?" he asked. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge of tension beneath it. There was a pause, followed by the crackle of the radio. "Let me check." We waited, standing in the middle of the hallway, staring at those open doors. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something about it wasn't right. Not just the doors, but the way the air felt, heavy and still, like the floor itself was holding its breath. Finally, dispatch came back. "Engineering says they haven't touched the floor today. No maintenance scheduled." Carl and I exchanged a glance. "Copy that," he said, but he didn't move. After another few minutes of walking the floor, we realized there was no one there. No guests, no pranksters, no signs of anyone at all. It was as if the noise complaints had come from thin air, just like those doors had opened themselves. I wasn't sure what I expected when we started walking back to the elevator, but nothing explained what we'd just seen. The silence followed us, almost too quiet, like the whole floor had swallowed up the sound. By the time we stepped into the elevator, Carl shook his head and muttered, "We're just gonna say the floor's clear." I didn't argue. I wasn't about to stick around and investigate further, not when my gut was screaming at me to leave. We reported the floor was empty and went about the rest of our shift. But neither of us mentioned it again. Not to the team, not to dispatch, not to anyone. Here's the worst part, though. A month later, I got transferred to day shifts, and guess what? They put me in charge of monitoring the cameras for the top floor. Every time I had to watch those hallways, I half expected to see something. The doors opening, shadows moving, something I couldn't explain. Thankfully, I never did. But I still think about that night, and every time I do, I wonder how close we got to whatever was really up there. Whatever it was, I'm glad we left it alone. Story 3. It was one of those nights where the air was so sharp and cold it almost stung your face. I was working graveyard security at a residential building, a job that, for the most part, was pretty uneventful. My usual routine was simple: Keep an eye on things, patrol the halls, and make sure no one tried anything stupid. The building had a rooftop pool, which was a big deal for management. They got real uptight about making sure no one used it after hours. It was locked up tight, with only security having access. I was posted up in the stairwell that night, taking a break from the biting wind outside. The stairwell was just a small space, a concrete cocoon that provided a little warmth, and I had my jacket zipped up to my chin. It was quiet except for the occasional hum of the building's HVAC system, and I was flipping through my phone, trying to pass the time. And then I heard it. It started as a soft laugh. Not the kind of laugh you'd expect to hear from a party or someone telling a joke, but something else entirely. It was high-pitched and uneven, like it was coming from someone who was maybe a little off. The kind of laugh you can't ignore. It echoed faintly through the stairwell, and I stopped scrolling, listening for a second, hoping I'd imagined it. Then it got louder. What started as a giggle turned into full-blown hysterics, a fit of laughter that built and built until it sounded like whoever was laughing was gasping for air. The sound carried in a way that made it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from, but I was certain it wasn't too close. Still, it wasn't far either. At first, I figured it was just someone being rowdy in their apartment, or maybe lingering at the pool area despite the cold. People threw little gatherings all the time, and sometimes they got loud. Nothing new. But before I could get comfortable again, the laughter turned into shrieking. Not playful shrieking, not drunk college kids shrieking. This was sharp and raw, the kind of sound that makes you sit up straighter without meaning to. I sighed, unzipped my jacket, and stepped out of the stairwell. It wasn't my favorite thing to confront drunk residents, but I had a job to do. I figured it had to be someone messing around near the pool. The sound was moving now, almost like it was pacing. I headed toward the pool area, glancing down at the locked gate that blocked off the rooftop access. Everything was secure. No signs of anyone trying to get in. But the sound wasn't coming from there anymore. It was coming from above. Me. I froze, staring at the rooftop itself. The only way anyone could have gotten up there was by climbing the concrete wall that surrounded it. A dangerous and downright stupid move, especially on a cold, slippery night like this. I didn't hear any footsteps, no shuffling or thuds, just the sound of those horrifying, inhuman shrieks bouncing off the walls. And then it stopped. Silence. No laughter, no screaming. Just the low whistle of the wind. I reached for my flashlight, clicking it on as I unlocked the gate and climbed up the short steps to the rooftop. The air was even colder up there, and the rooftop was pitch black aside from the small beam of light I was shining around. My breath fogged up in front of me as I took a few cautious steps, scanning the slick surface. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Barefoot prints clear as day, trailing across the rooftop in a path that made no sense. They weren't complete footprints, though, just the balls of feet and toes. No heel marks, like someone had been tiptoeing. My first thought was that someone had actually climbed up there. But that didn't explain the prints themselves. They were darker than the rooftop, like they had been left by dirty feet. But the roof wasn't exactly clean, so how could they look dirtier than the surface? I followed the trail with my light, but it led toward the edge of the roof. I stopped dead. There was no railing, no barrier, just open air. The idea that someone had been running around barefoot, shrieking like a lunatic, and potentially standing at the edge of a 40-story drop sent a chill down my spine. My pulse was racing at this point, but something about those footprints, something about how they hadn't been there before I stepped outside, made my stomach twist. I scanned the area one last time and decided I'd seen enough. Noping the hell out of there, I stepped carefully back down to the rooftop stairwell, locked the gate, and headed straight back inside. My shift was almost over, and there was no way I was going to stick around up there any longer than I had to. Paranormal or not, I figured it was better to leave it be. I still think about it sometimes. I'd rather convince myself it was just my imagination than believe there was someone or something up there that night. And if there's one thing I learned, some sounds are better left unanswered. Story 4. The lower lot at Universal Studios. Hollywood can be a strange place at night. I'd been working swing shifts as a security guard for a while, so I was used to the long, quiet patrols, usually driving around in a golf cart or Ford Explorer, keeping tabs on things like Jaw Lake and the residential area. You don't expect much to happen when you're just checking empty lots in the dark, but every now and then, something happens that makes you rethink everything. I'd heard rumors about one of the golf carts long before I ever saw it. The cart, number 15, had been out of commission for years, ever since someone wrecked it on the lot. It was supposed to be locked away, no longer operational, just gathering dust in storage somewhere. But for as long as I'd worked there, people talked about seeing it at night. At first, I laughed it off. No way a busted golf cart is cruising around on its own. I'd tell anyone who brought it up. But the stories kept piling up, guards swearing they'd caught glimpses of it zipping by on camera when no one else was around. No one had a solid explanation, just theories that range from someone's playing a prank to something's wrong with this place. I brushed it off every time, until the night I finally saw it myself. It was around 1 a.m., one of those chilly, clear nights when the lot felt darker than usual. I just parked my Ford Explorer near Jaw Lake, grabbing a quick minute to stretch my legs before continuing my patrol. Everything was quiet except for the faint hum of machinery in the distance. Perfectly normal. I was about to get back in the vehicle when the radio crackled. "Hey, you see anything on your end?" came the voice of my colleague Ben, who was patrolling the residential area. "Nope, all clear over here," I replied, glancing around. "Cameras are picking up something weird near you," he said after a pause. "Could be a stray cart. Check it out?" I frowned. A stray cart wasn't unusual. Sometimes maintenance workers left them unlocked, but there was no one on the schedule for that night, and no reason for any equipment to be left out here. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the edge of the lake, scanning the area for anything out of place. And then I saw it. Golf Cart 15. It came into view like something out of a bad horror movie, gliding smoothly across the asphalt in complete silence. The headlights were off, but the moonlight reflected faintly off its frame as it moved past the water. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up immediately. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either, just cruising along as if it had somewhere to be. My first thought was, someone's driving it. But as it passed, I saw the driver's seat. It was empty. I froze, my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand as I watched the cart continue down the path toward the residential area. It didn't swerve or stop, didn't hesitate like a piece of malfunctioning equipment. It just kept going, steady and deliberate. I reached for my radio, my voice quieter than I intended. "Ben, cart 15's here. No driver." There was a pause before he replied. "What?" "It's moving, by itself. Don't mess with me, man." "I'm not," I said, gripping the radio tightly. "Check your cameras." I heard him mutter something under his breath, and then there was silence on the other end. I followed the cart for a few more steps, but it was moving faster than I expected, and there was no way I could catch up without hopping back into the Explorer. Yeah," Ben said finally, his voice shaking slightly. "I see it. It's heading toward me now." I didn't know what to say. The cameras had caught it, confirmed it wasn't just me losing my mind in the middle of a night shift. Ben had a clear view of it now, but there wasn't much he could do except watch. By the time I got back to the Explorer and started driving toward his end of the lot, the cart had disappeared, slipping into the shadows like it had never been there at all. Ben and I spent the rest of the shift jittery, exchanging theories. We didn't even believe ourselves. "Maybe it's remote controlled," I said at one point, knowing full well no one in their right mind would set something like that up just to mess with the night crew. "Or maybe it's the ghost of whoever wrecked it," Ben joked nervously. Neither of us laughed. We checked the storage area the next morning, just to see if there was any chance the cart had been taken out by accident. It was still there, right where it had been for the past 6 years, out of commission, covered in dust, with no signs of recent movement. And yet the cameras had caught it zooming past us, clear as day. I still patrol the lower lot at night, and every time I see a golf cart, I can't help but glance at the number painted on its side. If I ever catch cart 15 again, I'm not sticking around to follow it this time. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Story 5. Working late shifts at the call center was something I got used to pretty quickly. The building itself was nothing special, a big drab office space with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly when the room was quiet enough. Most nights it was just a handful of us stuck there after hours, answering late-night inquiries and handling the occasional system hiccup. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Then there were the noises. At first, we all thought it was nothing. The slamming sound started every night around 8 p.m., always coming from the long corridor that ran down the center of the building. It was sharp, loud enough to make you flinch the first few times, like doors being shut with real force. But whenever someone went to check, the corridor was empty. The doors, heavy and self-closing, were never opened to begin with. No motion sensors were triggered, no drafts of air, nothing out of place. It was just sound. It became a joke between us after a while. "The ghost's working harder than we are," one of my coworkers said once, and we all laughed. We had to, because pretending it was something innocent, a strange quirk of an old building, was easier than thinking about what might really be happening. Then came the night it stopped being funny. It was a slow shift. Only 3 of us were working that evening, and the building felt even quieter than usual. Around 8:05, right on schedule, the first slam echoed through the corridor. I didn't even flinch anymore. I just glanced at the clock and rolled my eyes. "Right on time," I muttered, half to myself. But this time, the sound didn't stop. Another slam followed the first, and then another. The echo of each one seemed to ripple down the corridor, like someone was going from door to door, slamming them shut one by one. My colleague Jenna, sitting a few desks over, shot me a glance, her face pale. "You hear that?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yeah," I said. "It's probably just the wind." Except there wasn't any wind. The building was sealed up tight, with no drafts to speak of. The slams continued, louder now, closer. There was something deliberate about the rhythm, like someone was pacing the corridor, making sure we knew they were there. I stood up, hesitating for a moment before grabbing the flashlight we kept by the desk. Jenna followed me, clearly nervous but not wanting to stay behind. We reached the corridor, the sound still echoing faintly in the distance. The doors were all shut, just as they should have been. I shone the flashlight down the hallway, the beam cutting through the dim light. Nothing moved. "See?" I said, trying to sound casual. "It's probably just slam." The noise was deafening, right in front of us. We both jumped, Jenna letting out a small gasp. I whipped the flashlight toward the source, aiming it at the nearest door. It was still shut tight, unmoving. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel Jenna gripping my arm. "There's no one here," she whispered. We stood there for a moment, listening. The silence was almost worse than the noise, so heavy it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the fluorescent lights flickered, the shadows in the corridor shifting unnaturally. I swear I felt the temperature drop, the kind of cold that sinks into your skin and makes you feel like you're being watched. Jenna tugged my arm. "Let's go back," she said. "Please." I didn't argue. We practically ran back to our desks, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. When we got back, our other coworker, Mike, was sitting at his desk, looking at us like we'd lost our minds. "What's wrong with you two?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Before either of us could answer, Jenna blurted out, "The place is haunted." Mike laughed. "Yeah, sure. It's the ghost of customer complaints, haunting us for bad hold music." "I'm serious," she said, her voice rising. "We heard it. Someone was in the corridor, slamming doors. There's something here." Mike rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Relax. This place is old. Stuff creaks. You're just freaked out because of the stories." That's when Jenna dropped the bomb. "What stories?" Mike paused, realizing he'd said too much. You don't know?" "Know what?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. He sighed, clearly reluctant. "This building, it's built over an old plague pit, like medieval times. They just left the corpses buried and built right on top of it. A lot of places around here are like that." My stomach turned. "You're messing with us," I said, though my voice didn't sound as confident as I'd hoped. He shook his head. "I'm not. "Look it up." And he was right. Later that night, when the shift ended and I was safe in my own bed, I did look it up. The call center was indeed sitting atop one of the infamous plague pits where victims had been buried en masse centuries ago. No markers, no memorials, just a modern building plopped on top like it didn't matter. Story 6. Back in 2016, before I transitioned into law enforcement, I worked security at a local college. The job was quiet most of the time. Night shifts walking empty hallways, checking locked doors, and trying to keep boredom at bay. The scariest thing I expected to deal with was an over-eager prankster, or maybe a raccoon getting into the cafeteria. But one night the theater changed everything. It started with a movement detection alarm going off, tripping the system around 11:30 p.m. That wasn't unheard of. Motion sensors are finicky, and sometimes a moth flying too close can set them off. But this was the theater, a place that gave even the seasoned security staff an uneasy feeling. The older guards would joke about it being haunted, always laughing afterward. But there was something in the way they'd shake their heads that made it seem less like a joke. I was stationed at the desk in the operations room when the alert came through. The screen for the theater lobby camera flickered to life, and at first everything seemed normal. Rows of empty chairs lined up neatly, the dim glow of exit signs casting faint shadows. Then I saw the lights. One overhead light flickered, sharp, deliberate, like someone was flipping the switch. It went steady for a moment, and then a different light flickered, farther down the lobby. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting at the grainy footage. The pattern seemed intentional, almost like it was signaling something. First one, then another, then back to the first. I keyed my radio. Theater alarms tripped. I'm checking the cameras. Lobby lights are flickering, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. The other guard on duty was out on rounds, probably in the far building where reception was spotty. Great. I sighed and grabbed my flashlight, double-checking that my keys were clipped to my belt. If it was just a wiring issue or a bird flying around, I'd feel ridiculous getting worked up. Still, there was something about the way the lights moved that made my chest tighten. The walk over to the theater was uneventful, the halls eerily quiet as usual. The magnetic locks on the theater doors were supposed to be foolproof. No one without clearance could get in or out. When I reached the double doors, they were sealed tight, just as they should have been. I swiped my key card and pushed the door open, stepping into the lobby. The lights stopped flickering immediately. I stood there for a moment, frozen in the silence. The air felt heavy, like the room was holding its breath. I swept my flashlight around, the beam cutting through the dim space. Nothing moved. The rows of chairs sat empty, untouched. The big echoing space felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. "Hello," I called out, even though I knew better. My voice bounced off the walls, coming back to me too loud. No answer. I walked farther in, my shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. I checked the corners, the shadows, even the stage area. The doors to the main theater were locked, the emergency exit lights glowing faintly above them. Everything was exactly how it should have been, and yet every instinct I had told me I wasn't alone. I made my way to the sensor panel to reset the system. As I reached out to press the button, the hairs on my arm stood up. That heavy air I'd noticed when I walked in, it felt closer now, like it was pressing down on me. My flashlight flickered. I froze, staring at the beam as it sputtered and steadied again. The batteries were fresh. I'd replaced them at the start of my shift. My thumb hovered over the panel's reset button, suddenly unsure if I wanted to turn my back to the room. Then, just as I pushed the button, I heard it. A faint sound, so soft I almost convinced myself I imagined it. It wasn't footsteps exactly, more like a shuffle, like fabric brushing against fabric. It came from behind me near the rows of chairs. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I slowly turned, sweeping the beam toward the sound. Nothing. Empty seats, empty lobby. I wasn't sticking around any longer. I strode back to the doors, trying not to look over my shoulder. The second I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, less oppressive. I locked the door behind me and radioed in to log the incident as a false alarm. Technically, it was true. There hadn't been any signs of forced entry or tampering, but I knew better. The next day, I reviewed the lobby camera footage out of curiosity. The flickering lights were there, clear as day, but no shadows, no figures, nothing unusual apart from that. It made no sense. Electrical issues don't stop on a dime the second someone walks in. I told myself it was just one of those things. Old building, faulty wiring, overactive imagination. But I avoided late-night theater patrols after that. Some places just have a feeling about them, a presence you can't quite explain. And whatever it was in that theater, I didn't want to meet it again. Story 7, it was a quiet evening shift at the supermarket in Holland where I worked temporary security. Nothing about the night stood out, just the usual customers shuffling in and out, the dull buzz of fluorescent lights, and the faint hum of refrigeration units coming from the back. My job was straightforward. Keep an eye on things, make sure no one caused trouble, and ensure everything locked up properly when the night was over. Then the call came through. A staff member ran up to me looking pale and breathless. "There's a kid," she said, her voice shaky, "locked in the walk-in cooler. We can hear him yelling for help." I frowned, trying to process what she just said. "A kid? In the cooler?" She nodded quickly. "Customers heard it too. He's yelling, 'Help! Let me out!'" Someone must have locked him inside. My first instinct was confusion. The walk-in coolers weren't like regular doors. They were secured with magnetic locks. You couldn't just wander in by accident, and locking someone inside without the magnetic master key was next to impossible. Still, I grabbed my key and followed her toward the back of the store, my boots squeaking against the tiled floor. As we got closer to the cooler, I started to hear it too, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a child's voice echoing from behind the heavy metal door. "Help!" The cry was muffled, desperate, and sent a shiver down my spine. A small group of customers and staff had gathered nearby, murmuring anxiously. They all turned to me as I approached, like I was supposed to have all the answers. "All right, step back," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I slotted my magnetic key into the panel and heard the soft click as the lock disengaged. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the door open. The cooler was empty. I shined my flashlight inside, scanning the shelves and corners just to be sure. No kid. No signs of anyone at all. The produce was neatly stacked, untouched, and the air was icy cold as it should have been. The cries had stopped the second the door opened, leaving an eerie silence hanging in the air. I turned back to the group, half expecting someone to say, "Gotcha!" and laugh at my expense. But they didn't. The staff members exchanged uneasy glances, and one of the customers, a middle-aged man with a grocery bag in hand, spoke up. "I swear we heard it," he said. "It sounded like a little boy, screaming to get out." I nodded slowly, not sure what to say. "Well, there's no one here," I said finally, stepping back and letting the door close with a heavy thud. The magnetic lock re-engaged with a soft hum. One of the younger staff members muttered nervously, "Maybe it's some kind of prank." "Maybe," I agreed, though I didn't sound convinced. The cooler had been locked tight before I opened it. How would someone even pull off a prank like that? "Or maybe," another worker said with a nervous chuckle, "it's a ghost. You know this store is built on old ground, right? Weird stuff happens here." The group laughed uneasily and I forced a grin, trying to shake off the creeping unease in my chest. "Yeah, sure," I said. "Let's blame it on a ghost." The crowd dispersed after that, and I went back to my rounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that clung to me. Every time I passed by the cooler, I half expected to hear that voice again. The echoes of the child's cries were still fresh in my mind, and no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, a prank, a trick of the acoustics, it didn't add up. I finished my shift without incident, but when I left the store that night, the cold air outside felt different, like it carried something with it, something unseen. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The locked door, the cries for help, the empty cooler. Some things don't have a simple explanation, and sometimes you're better off leaving them alone. Story 8. It was 2016, and I was working security at the old forensic mental health unit. The place had a reputation. People in town said it was haunted, And honestly, it wasn't hard to believe. It used to be an asylum way back in the day, and the stories about how they treated patients there were enough to make your skin crawl. They didn't just experiment on people, they broke them. And when it finally shut down, the whole place was abandoned, except of course for the unmarked graves. Over 200 bodies, they said. They just dug them up, moved them to a graveyard nearby, and built right over it. Even with that history, most nights on the job were uneventful. Sure, I'd feel a little uneasy walking through the halls, but I'd chalk it up to the building's age and my imagination. It wasn't until that one night that I couldn't explain what happened, no matter how hard I tried. It was just past midnight when the call came in. My partner and I were told to check out the grounds because some kids had been spotted earlier, trying to sneak into the buildings. It wasn't unusual. Every few weeks, teenagers would sneak in on a dare. The place was practically a magnet for ghost hunters and thrill seekers. We hopped into the truck and headed over, fully expecting to do the usual: scare off anyone who shouldn't be there, secure the doors, and call it a night. We started in the intake room, which was my least favorite place on the entire property. I hated that room. It's where patients were brought in, stripped of their belongings, and, let's be real, their dignity. The old desk was still there, rotting in the corner, like some kind of twisted relic. Walking into that room felt like stepping into another time, and not in a good way. The air was always thick, like it was pressing down on you, and I swear it was colder than the rest of the building. As soon as I stepped in that night, the feeling hit me again. Heavy, suffocating, like something or someone was watching me. I didn't say anything to my partner. I didn't want to seem paranoid. We checked the room quickly, shining our flashlights into every corner. It was empty, just like it always was, but the feeling didn't go away. Then we moved on to the treatment room. This was the heart of the asylum's darkest stories. Electroshock therapy, ice baths, restraints, all the kinds of treatments that belonged in nightmares. The room was stripped bare now, just cracked tiles and flaking paint. But walking into it, you could still feel something, like the room remembered what had happened there. As we stepped inside, my partner froze. "Did you see that?" he whispered, gripping his flashlight tighter. "See what?" I asked, my stomach already sinking. "There was movement over there." He pointed toward the far corner of the room where the shadows seemed darker than they should have been. I shined my light in that direction, but there was nothing, just empty walls. My gut told me to leave, but we had a job to do, so we kept going. The air in the room seemed to get colder as we moved forward, and I swear I started hearing whispers. Faint, almost like static, but just clear enough to make out a rhythm. I glanced at my partner. From the way his jaw was clenched, I could tell he heard it too. And then it happened. The scream. It was loud, piercing, and it didn't sound human. It was raw, like someone or something was in agony. The kind of sound that makes your blood run cold. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere, bouncing off the walls and swallowing the room. We didn't stick around to figure out what it was. We turned and bolted, slamming the door behind us as if that would keep whatever it was from following. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. By the time we got back to the truck, I was shaking. My partner was too, though he was trying to hide it. "You felt it, right?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence. I nodded. "Yeah, I felt it." We didn't say much after that. We logged it as an uneventful patrol. No trespassers, no activity. But we both knew that wasn't true. Whatever was in that building, it wasn't something we were equipped to deal with. Story 9. It was just another patrol, or at least, that's what I told myself when we set out that night, heading toward the hills. We'd been tasked with covering a remote area close to a village we'd visited before, so we weren't unfamiliar with the terrain. But something about the route didn't sit right. The place had an air to it, a stillness that wasn't the usual quiet you'd expect in the countryside. It felt heavier, like the ground itself was holding on to secrets. The squad ahead of us reported movement before we'd even gotten close. They were positioned slightly higher up in the hills with a clear view of the area, but their calls over the radio sounded off. It wasn't panic exactly, but there was something unnervingly tense in their tone, as if they didn't know how to put what they were experiencing into words. Possible movement, they said, and left it at that. That was enough to get us moving. When we reached their position, it was clear something wasn't right. The first thing I noticed was the look on their faces. They were pale like sheets, and their movements were jittery, almost mechanical. They'd seen something. Of that I was sure. The squad leader, the CO, was gripping his radio tightly, but there was something odd about it. He was holding one end of the wire, the connector not even attached to the receiver. The cord dangled uselessly, like a prop, but his eyes were locked on it. "Why are you holding it like that?" I asked, stepping closer. He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed, his mouth slightly open, like he was trying to process something that didn't make sense. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "She's still talking." I frowned. "Who?" The squad exchanged nervous glances, and one of them muttered, "We all heard it." The CO shook his head, gripping the radio tighter. "A girl, her voice." "Through this," he said, lifting the disconnected wire. "She said, I don't know what she said. It sounded like she was crying." My stomach dropped. A disconnected radio broadcasting anything was impossible, yet everyone in the squad swore up and down they'd heard it. The voice had come through clear as day. A girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sobbing, calling for help. The hills around us were dark, the shadows stretching long under the weak moonlight. I swept my flashlight across the ground, scanning for any signs of movement, any footprints that might explain what they'd seen. But there was nothing, just rocks and dirt. "Could it have been someone from the village?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The CO shook his head. "We checked. The village is 3 miles downhill. There's no one here but us." It wasn't long before I started to feel it too. The weight of the place, the way the air seemed colder and thicker the longer we stood there. It didn't feel like we were alone, but every time we tried to pinpoint the source of the unease, it moved, slipping just out of reach. The squad refused to patrol farther into the area. I didn't blame them. Whatever had happened with that radio, whatever they'd seen or heard, it had shaken them to the core. We returned to base that night, reporting the area clear, even though it didn't feel clear at all. I still don't know what happened up there. All I know is that everyone in that squad swears by what they experienced. The disconnected radio broadcasting a girl's voice, the shadowy movement, the suffocating presence in the hills. And the worst part, the village at the bottom of the hill, the one we'd visited before, was completely empty when we checked it later. Every single resident was gone, vanished without a trace. Some places carry a weight that doesn't leave, and whatever happened in those hills, I hope I never cross paths with it again. Story 10. Working the graveyard shift as a security guard in an office building might sound boring, and honestly, most of the time it was. From 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., the place was dead quiet. No workers, no phones ringing, just me and a whole lot of empty cubicles. The building wasn't huge, 2 stories, around 50 to 80 workers during the day, all in their own cubicles. But at night, it was just me, stationed at the front desk by the switchboard. Every 2 or 3 hours, I'd do a patrol of the entire building, just to keep things interesting, I guess. I'd hear the occasional strange sound, thuds from upstairs, what sounded like faint footsteps down the hall. But I got used to it. I figured it was the building settling, maybe the AC kicking in. Besides, I never found anything when I checked. It was always quiet, until that one night. It was my 3rd patrol of the shift, and the clock was creeping toward 3:30 a.m. That was usually the time things got weird. 3:15, 3:30, somewhere around then. It's like the whole building would shift, the quiet settling in a little too heavy, like something was watching. But even then, I brushed it off. I mean, what else could it be? You've got to tell yourself something to get through those shifts. I headed up to the 2nd floor with my flashlight in hand, same as always. The stairs creaked softly under my boots, and as I reached the top, I did my usual sweep. Flashlight scanning the cubicles, the walls, the ceiling. That's when I saw it. 2 of the ceiling tiles were gone, not shifted or loose. Gone. A gaping hole, the kind that wasn't there on my earlier patrols. And it wasn't just that. 2 of the roof hatches, the heavy metal ones that take effort to open, were fully swung wide. I stopped cold. For a second, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe maintenance had been up here earlier. Maybe I just didn't notice it the first 2 times I walked through. But even as I thought that, I knew it didn't add up. The ceiling tiles were intact earlier. The hatches were closed. I'd stake my paycheck on it. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight up into the empty space where the tiles used to be. The beam disappeared into darkness. Nothing but wires and emptiness. The air felt heavier up there, like I'd walked into a room with no windows, even though the building's HVAC should have kept it even. I radioed it in, my voice shaky even though I tried to keep it steady. This is front desk, second floor. Roof hatches are open, missing ceiling tiles, requesting confirmation on earlier maintenance. Dispatch crackled back after a moment. No maintenance scheduled tonight. You sure? Yeah, positive, I said, the words catching in my throat. Copy that. Note it for morning staff. That was it. I was on my own. I debated climbing up to check the hatch, but the longer I stood there, the less I wanted to. My gut was screaming at me to get out of there. I backed away slowly, my flashlight still trained on the missing tiles, half expecting something, or someone, to pop their head out. Nothing happened. I headed back downstairs trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When the morning staff came in around 6 a.m., I told them what had happened. They looked confused, even a little concerned, but none of them had an explanation. Maintenance hadn't been in, and no one could figure out how the tiles or hatches would have moved on their own. Later, I mentioned it to the guy who worked the shift before me, an older man who'd been there for years. He was the kind of guy who kept to himself, quiet, polite, and deeply religious. When I brought it up, he gave me this long, measured look. "You noticed it, huh?" he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "Noticed what?" I asked. "The weirdness," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "This building's got something. I don't know what. Seen things move, heard things I can't explain, but I don't talk about it. Not worth stirring it up." "Stirring what up?" I pushed, but he just shook his head. "Just don't look for answers," he said quietly. "Some questions don't need them." After that, I couldn't look at the building the same way. It wasn't just the hatches or the tiles. Other little things started to stand out. Computer screens flickering on when no one was around. Coffee machines brewing on their own. Radios turning on to static in empty rooms. I'd swear that objects were moved from one patrol to the next, though I couldn't prove it. Nothing dangerous ever happened, but it was enough to make me question what was really going on. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.